data has less and less value the more it is exposed and stolen.
There's so much alerts and so much breaches and so many data leaks. But what you see in the market is that you've got a huge transformation.
Data protection, the crown jewel of the managed services profession. If you are an MSP, chances are you protect, monitor, manage client data all the time. But the rules around data have changed significantly and continue to change. And previously used tools, tactics, and rules really no longer apply as data theft crimes and risk increase. And so that brings me to our guest for today, entering the MSPZone, Mr. Guy Bavley, CEO of Actifile, who will be discussing some of these topics with us. Guy, welcome to the MSPZone.
Thank you very much, Charles, for inviting me. I'm really excited to take part in this session. I'm looking forward to talk with you about data security, data protection, the differences, and how we can help MSPs help their customers to be more secure in terms of data.
So I met you in person just not that long ago at the Enable Empower event in Frisco, Texas. It was a pleasure to meet you and your team there. And maybe for those who are not aware of what Actifile does, could you give us a quick summary?
Sure. So Actifile is a managed data security solution platform for MSPs and their customers. We're focusing only on MSPs and MSSPs and their customers that are roughly between 40, 50 employees to 1,000 and even more employees. So the small, medium enterprises. And those organizations are under different, pressure points. You've got the privacy regulations that is multiplying by the year. You've got state, federal, even international ones. If you're, working internationally, you've got ransomware attack that now have mutated and stealing the data and shame you. You've got negligent employees working from home and using all kinds of shadow IT application. Cyber insurance is breathing down your neck, with increased premiums and lower coverage and sometimes refusal to renew. So the need is obvious. And what Actifile does, it provides you a comprehensive end-to-end solution all the way from discovering, that means classifying each and every file according to its content, sensitive content, personal content, could be SSNs, it could be PHI, EPHI, PCI, ACH, all the way to CUI and CMMC level 2. It classifies the data. It does something very unique. We quantify the data risk. So we can tell you per classification, you've got 15 files, you've got 70,000 records, you've got $200,000 worth of risk. And we can talk about it. There's an industry benchmark called FAIR that help us do that. So classification, quantification of the data with full monitoring, who's using it, which application, and how much is flowing outside the organization. And not just number of files and number of records, $200,000 worth of risk left the organization last week through Skype, through Slack, through WhatsApp web, and so on. That's part one. Part two is we enable MSPs and their customers to remediate their risk by providing what we call managed encryption, coupled with seamless decryption, and we can talk about it later. But eventually, when you preemptively encrypt the data, if files are stolen or misplaced, nobody can open them, but the organization doesn't change the way they work because we have seamless decryption. That's what we do. We love MSPs. We work with them all the time. We actually co-designed the product with MSPs. It's a fun fact. We co-designed the product with MSPs, and one of our early adopters, Alex Putman from upstate New York, became our head of customer success after she sold their business. So we have undivided attention to MSPs and being, in that market, I think it's fascinating and it's a growing and interesting market, to say the least.
Well, that's an understatement. And I want to get into data classification and categorization in a moment, because I think that you hit on something that I I think has been ignored for far too long. But I want to start at a high level, and I'm going to ask you maybe it's not a softball easy question. I don't think it's an easy question, but has data lost its allure? And what I mean by that is we see so many stories about data breach involving massive, massive amounts of data, troves of data. And it seems to maybe the casual bystander, perhaps outside the MSP channel, that data has less and less value the more it is exposed and stolen. Does that make sense? And could you address that topic?
Well, I can understand where you're coming from because there's so much alerts and so much breaches and so many data leaks. But what you see in the market is that you've got a huge transformation. The world of data security, what people called DLP 20 years ago, and Asaf, my co-founder and the CTO of Actified, invented the topic 20 years ago. So what we see is that data is not less important, it's even more important. So much that there is a new category in the market called data security that handles sensitive data across multiple repositories, on-premise, on-device, on the cloud, in a different way than the past. And it's completely new market category. We're introducing that to MSPs, but there are other companies who are doing it for the enterprise. So I think it's a kind of misperception. Data is the livelihood of any digital enterprise. Data is, I think, with MSPs and their customers, it's a kind of something they don't pay attention to. It's a kind of, think about it, that's a favorite metaphor that I'm using. Think about it that you own a jewelry store, okay? And in that jewelry store, you have diamonds and rubies and necklaces and very expensive watches. Would you imagine running the store without an inventory system? No, right? What happens what happens with the mid-market and their MSP is that they're running blind. And you're building more and more perimeter of security, EDR and SOC and SIEM and so on, but what you're trying to protect, you're not aware of. Now, the enterprise, they have undergone massive, and they are going massive change, adopting new tools. There's new categories in the market. There's new tools. There's new approaches, especially because of the cloud. But I think the notion of maybe cry wolf in some way is not correct. And you can see the regulator is not accepting it by far. FTC has added new regulation. CCPA is being copied from California to other states. In every nation in the world, when we're working primarily in the US, but outside the US, every nation in the world has. From Turkey to Australia, from Singapore to Brazil, all of them have privacy regulation. The US is more complicated because of the state level. All of them has privacy regulation. I think it's not coming from the organizations anymore, Charles. It's coming from the consumers. You as a consumer, especially young consumers, do not accept the fact that their data is being exposed in any way.
So I want to ask you a follow-up question because I think that's a fantastic point, Guy. Your position is that the regulation, the legislation around privacy specifically, is raising the issue of not just securing the perimeter, which has been the legacy role of the MSP for 30 plus years. And they've done a very good job of it, I think. But they need to go further than that, which is to equip the mid-market and SMB customer to be aware of what is inside the perimeter that they are protecting. In your jewelry store example, because the privacy legislation is going to explicitly ask at some point, are you aware of what you were guarding? Are you aware of what the people scaling the walls are trying to steal? Is that the point?
Everybody, it's not just the regulator. Their consumers are asking about it. Your customers, your MSP customers, consumers are asking about it. It's not just regulation is a framework to guide you to do something, and it can, charge you with a fine. But the biggest long-term damage, by the way, Charles, is not the fine. It's the loss of reputation, loss of customers. It's the loss of trust from your consumers. Now, until 4 or 5 years ago, the pressure from the regulator didn't hit the mid-market at all. But it's now hitting the mid-market. But don't just look at the regulation. What are we trying to protect at any given day? From all the security products, we are trying to protect two things. One, productivity. You don't want the server data. And two, the data. How can you protect something you don't know? So I think it's also, if you think about it, if you're an IT manager, a CIO of a 10,000 people organization, okay, you're not focusing on just describing the gaps and vulnerabilities. If you're doing a good job as a CISO, you're presenting the risk. And the risk is a derivative of what you have internally. And what you have internally is the data. So now as an MSSP, you can elevate yourself not just from an MSP to MSSP, you can elevate yourself to a virtual CIO by showing them the data and data-related risk. It's absolutely a new path for MSPs.
Understood. I do want to get to data classification and categorization, but we have to address 30 years of this, which is I do know MSPs who have practiced in vertical market areas such as legal and healthcare, where there is a heightened sense of the protection of that type of data. Call it healthcare data, call it financial data, call it legal client data. Do you believe that there has been a lack of tools, or a lack of, or is it something else that has caused I don't want to say inattention, but it is inattention or inability to look at what is inside that data, if that makes sense?
It's a perfect storm situation, Charles. What happened? First of all, the regulator didn't, chase down small and medium enterprises at all until 4 or 5 years ago. When Asaf, created the first DLP data security product 20 years ago, it was only the big banks, that he was working with that were concerned, and they were under strict regulation. So the regulation came and started, looking at small and medium enterprises. But why did the regulation look at it? Because the risk got higher. 80% of the attacks at any given moment are on small and medium enterprises, because there are plenty of them, because they're not as secure, because they don't have enough teams to deploy and so on. So combine the risk by internal and external threat with the regulation and the cyber insurance. Now, cyber insurance is a follow-up. Until 2 or 3 years ago, they didn't care about what measures do you have in place. And certainly they were not asking anything about the data. Now they're asking. So it's a perfect storm. And the tooling was not in place, for sure. The old method of doing data security, which is data leakage prevention, as a method, was event-driven, required a lot of attention for detailed events, and a team to handle it, on a regular basis, unless you want to the productivity of the organization to go down. That approach has died a couple of years ago, and now we're bringing a new approach that requires little to no attention from the MSPs, but still allows them to solve the problem. And again, we're part of a trend. There are other methods, there are other utilities that are taking a new approach. Combine all of that, that's a perfect storm.
So nobody was asking, even if they were asking, which they weren't, the tools weren't available. So this wasn't necessarily a failure of the MSP business model. It's just, it wasn't, the tools weren't there and the pressure wasn't there. Now those both are there. I want to talk to your point earlier about data class, just understanding the data that is inside the customer network that the MSP is in charge of protecting. Not all data, we've talked about this a lot here and amongst the MSP community for many years, about not all data is the same. Can you speak to how you view the role of the MSP and the different hierarchies of data, and how the MSP might start to approach that in 2024 and beyond?
I think the first step that MSP needs to take is what we call data risk assessment, which is an additional a tool in the toolbox that MSPs have. Most of the MSPs will do penetration testing, or they will do vulnerability assessment and so on. External, internal, that automated or not doesn't really matter. It's partial to the actual overall view of the world of IT. It's like you're looking at on the operating system level, is the operating system patch? You're looking at the hardware level, do we have a disk failure? You're even looking at the network level, which is the network monitoring. You're looking at routers and hubs and so on. But where's the monitoring on the data, which is a very important component? It's the next layer on top of the hardware, operating system, and the network. So logically, it's something that you should do. You should do that on a continuous basis. So data risk assessment is the action of discovering, classifying, measuring the potential risk, and it can go up and down. It's a perfect tool also for MSPs to show an additional added value from a business perspective. When you're talking with a business owner, and I was an IT manager for years, it's very hard to discuss with executives, you've got another vulnerability, you've got another missing tool. It's like if I come to sell you an insurance or put another alarm or lock onto your door without appraising how much valuable stuff you've got at your home, there's a missing part. So if you talk with a business person and tell them at home you've got $500,000 worth of valuables, or the jewelry store, you've got millions of dollars of jewels and they're scattered around the shop. Now there is a discussion about something that they can relate to. So I think the MSPs, it's good for them for a couple of reasons. It's elevating them to take a place at the table. It allows them to generate, a new revenue stream from a differentiated service. And I think that's the most important thing. I think their customers are expecting them to do that. I think if you're a customer and something happens, you will tell yourself, how much data did I lose? And the MSP says, I don't know. Wouldn't they expect you to do something like that? It's not in the contract, but they do expect you to do something like that. So it's coming from different directions.
You raised another very interesting point. In the field of law, right? It's a very well known idea that a lot of clients will lie to their attorneys, even though they're not supposed to. They're not always going to be forthcoming. I'm sure that's not unique to just the legal profession, but I know a few MSPs, and I've talked to them over the years, and I know that there is that sentiment amongst the MSP profession that there is some, maybe not intentional, but perhaps a lack of understanding of what is inside the customer network. Meaning, I want you to take on the risk of managing my network, and they're not going to necessarily be that forthcoming about, oh, we're sitting on a whole bunch of social security information or bank information or health information or trade secret formulas or schematics or whatever the valuable thing is. And I don't know why they do it, but I'm going to assume that it does exist. Talk to me about how the classification and the identification through that data risk assessment theory that you brought up would actually play out for, let's say, a new customer coming on board with an MSP, and the MSP says, I think that there's something very valuable there, but I don't want to take the customer's word for it. Because I think that's a very common situation. Does that make sense, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it does make sense. By the way, MSPs can win prospect with showing them with data risk assessment. I've seen it happening. So again, you're meeting a new customer. You're taking over responsibility for their network. They might say that they don't have any sensitive data. Okay, it's probably because they don't imagine how much residual long tail, amount of dormant data they have scattered around, especially if they've been in business more than 12 months or so. That's number one. Number two, the hidden problem is that even if they don't have a lot, there's a lot of open communication with the world. Think about, that's another transformation, Charles, that happened in the last 5 to 10 years. It's the elimination of the perimeter. There's no local area networks anymore. Even if you're sitting in an office, you're connecting to the internet. You're not going through the hub. And people are working from home. People are working with all kinds of shadow IT. So it's not even the ransomware. Your data is flowing in and out all the time. So, by the way, the holy grail is not just to tell them you've got that amount of SSN or that amount of credit cards across their network, sitting waiting for an accident to happen. That's part number one. Part number two is you're leaking all the time. You're leaking not because you're thinking maliciously that someone is malicious, but people are using productivity tools like Monday.com just because they want to, and nobody can know and will stop them. So that's a revelation. When you show that to your customer, you're saying, okay, you've got that amount of risk, it's flowing out, you're adding more because you're accepting more all the time. So the manifestation that will help people understand the complexity is not number of files and number of records. Show them the money. On average, Charles, across thousands and thousands of data risk assessment that we've done, across geographies, I mean in the states, across verticals, you know how much there is on average? $4.6 million worth of risk. $4.6 million worth of risk. That's
is that? Do you quantify that in the term of its value on the dark web?
No, we do something else, and we didn't invent it. We implement it automatically. There's an organization called FAIR, FAIR, FAIR.org. It's an organization for non-for-profit information security experts, and they've done thousands of analysis around, breaches and data leaks and so on, and they took this primary risk or primary potential damage is your incident response team coming, auditors, accountants. That's the primary risk or primary potential damage. The secondary is long-term. It's loss of reputation, loss of customers, loss of productivity because you now need to reinstate things and data is lost and so on. That they brought it down to a number per type of record. Healthcare-related records, $150 to $200. PCI-related records between $75 and $100. So now you've got something objective that you can take the records, each and every type, multiply that by the potential damage, aggregate that across the organization. When I'm saying $200,000, it's across files, across repositories, across the network. So, and there, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so what you're saying is that the MSP should start to take a look at the customer's data in a similar way, or that's not a good way to put it. The MSP should present to the customer a quantification of the value of the data that they have and say, this is its value, its street value to a criminal who would want to come in and take it. Because no, you're saying that that's not happening today.
It's not the dark web, cost. I'm saying if this record, it's a approximation. It doesn't have to be fully, perfect, but it's actual potential damage that will happen to your customer. It's not how much it's going to cost on the dark web. If that, PCI record and thousands of that will be stolen, the outcome, primary and secondary potential damage will be X. So that's much more tangible than just saying somebody would buy it on the dark web, which is, less meaningful. It's a different approach. Now we're automating that approach. We're relying every MSP to handle that. And it's important that it should be continuous. You don't want to do once a year data risk assessment. You want to show that to the customer every QBR, every quarterly business review, because it changes all the time.
Well, I tell you, Guy, I like that very much because I think that we've been a big advocate and see a lot of MSPs who adopt risk-based pricing for their managed services. And what you have just described fits very nicely. In fact, it's the foundation of risk-based pricing for a managed service provider to be able to accurately assess what the pricing for their managed services ought to be for a particular customer should be impacted in no small part to the type of data that they're protecting. Yeah. And I think that's a fair point that we've never really had. Now let me bring you to a question of your tool is not a replacement for RMM or for backup. This is a completely new MSP tool set category. True, not true?
Absolutely true. We're ushering a new category in the market for MSPs. It's a potential new revenue stream. It's a differentiated value-added service. And I actually very much like the risk-based pricing. If you have tons of sensitive data that you can prove to the customer, and your people, your employees are working with external providers and sending it out and in, data all the time, which is part of their day-to-day operations, this is a risky organization. Now you should, as an MSP, show that to the customer and justify why you're taking, a higher price, and you're building that into their set of services. So it's a new service, it's a new market opportunity. It's not a replacement for EDR or RMM or SOC or SIEM. It can augment other tools. It stands next to them, and it's built for MSPs. So with all the necessary, qualities built into that.
Is it your opinion that the DLP market that has been, you're correct, very well established in the enterprise, this is now filtering down? So am I to take this as your position is the data classification, categorization, but that's my term, marketplace for mid-market and SMB is the wave of the future? So are we talking like end user organizations below 500 or 1,000 seats, something around that?
First of all, DLP as a concept, as a market, a category, has died like 6 years ago. Gartner, who had a magic quadrant for DLP, killed it 6 years ago, saying it's not efficient anymore. So now DLP controls, that's the confusing thing. DLP controls every now and then are embedded in other tools that are not DLP only. So that's a bit confusing. Again, that system is prudent to high cost of labor and a need for a team and a project and implementation, different discussion. So, and I see MSPs. By the way, I see something very interesting about MSPs, and I see it more and more. Yes, most of the organizations, 80% of the organizations below 500, and that's, by the way, reading market, analysis of different, IDC and so on. Even McKinsey wrote a report on that. 500 and below are MSPs. 500 below and above, there's a very interesting trend right now. MSPs, and especially MSSPs, start to co-manage larger organizations next to the IT. So I've got few MSP partners, customers that are bringing us in to larger and larger organizations. Now, for you as an MSSP, it's a big opportunity. You can deploy that and manage your own 20, 30, 40 customers. And if you're co-managing the bigger enterprises, and I'm not talking about 50,000 employees, 5,000, 4,000, 3,000, 10,000, they need it. And by the way, they don't like to implement 5 tools to solve one problem. The problem that we're solving, there was a classification tool, there was a leakage prevention tool, there was an encryption tool, there was a risk quantification tool, and a monitoring of flow tool. Combine all of them integrated, we bring you the package end to end, and in a cloud managed portal, which is multi-tenant. So I think there's a huge opportunity for MSPs to go to the below 500 and to go to the above 500, and for sure.
Yeah, I like the fact that you have a multi-pronged approach. Our take is I keep using and going back to data classification and categorization because that's baked into our standard for MSP organizations. Is we call it classification and categorization of data, which has been around for many, many years. But I don't think that they have had very effective tools until now. That especially for the mid-market and below. Were readily available for the MSPs. So I think this is very exciting. Now, are your plans to start domestically in the United States, North America, but to grow internationally?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of our customer base right now, MSPs and their customers are in the US, 95%, but we have early beginnings. There's demand. We're focusing our efforts in the US, but there's demand. We have partners in Ireland, we have partners in Australia and New Zealand, we have partners in Singapore, which are more highly regulated, industry. Singapore is highly regulated. The government there is doing marvelous support to bring, cybersecurity to smaller organization. Australia is heavily, attacked from different directions. And Ireland is a highly sophisticated market with it's not a big market, but with very good taste for innovation. So yes, definitely focusing on North America, but we'll branch out, later on to other countries because they all have the same problem, to a different degree. It's a common problem with privacy.
It's global. I agree with you, and it's going to be at. I think there are different levels of maturity, but eventually the role of the MSP is going to get to the point where this is going to be mainstream. This is going to be standard operating procedure for all MSPs. So I think you're in a good position. If a MSP wants to learn more about Actifile, what is the best way? What's your website URL?
Actifile.com. Maybe we'll put it on the end of the podcast. Actifile.com. It has all the use cases and the product material. You can schedule a meeting with us through that website, and we're collaborating with MSP Alliance as well. So you can hear more about us through Charles and the team. We're very excited to work with you. I think I heard a lot about your organization in the past from MSPs and so on, and I'm happy that we have a chance to talk and to collaborate going forward. Exciting.
Absolutely. Well, it's a very important topic, and regardless, go check out Actifile, go see what they have, but pay attention, regardless of what you do, the issue of understanding data that you manage, classifying it, categorizing it. It is a best practice in the managed services sector, and so you should be doing something along these lines. And I hope that this topic was of some help to those of you who are out there. Guy, thank you so much for being on the MSP Zone,
and
continued success.
Thank you.